Good evening, everyone. Guys, am I audible? Yeah, thank you. So, in our last session, we were discussing with the Storm Shield UTM, right? We have seen how we can configure policies on the Storm Shield UTM, right? So, we'll continue with the Storm Shield configurations, right? So, we'll see what all other configurations can be done. So, to log in, let us log in using the firewall IP address. So 192.168.10.1/admin. So that's a URL we use for logging in. So we were writing policies in the filter and NAT tabs, right? So we have given security policies permitting our LAN network computers to access something on internet. So we have seen how we can permit only some specific services to the users. We have also seen if we have to give full permission to a specific IP address, how we can do that. Then we have also done the URL filter and antivirus inspection configurations. So now, before we proceed with other configurations, let us see how we can perform user authentication, right? How we can perform user authentication on the Storm Shield UTM. So here, when you speak about user authentications, we know there are two type of user authentications. One is internal authentication and the other is external authentication. Right? So in internal authentication, you'll have all the user IDs and passwords saved locally on the firewall itself. In case of external authentication, you have you have to use a third party authentication server. So we have seen these two methods in ASA. So there we were using something like a TechAx server, right, for the external authentication. So here on Storm Shield, let us do both the internal authentication. We will create the user accounts on the firewall itself, and then we will also do an external authentication. So for external authentication, we will do Active Directory integration so that all the user accounts that are on the Active Directory can be used for authentications, right? So to perform internal authentication under configuration, right? Under configuration, we go to the users tab. We go to the users tab. And here in the users tab, you have an option called directory configuration, right? There is an option called directory configuration. So go to directory configuration. So once we click on it, it will start a directory configuration wizard. So the first step is creating internal authentication, right? So the first step is we are trying to create internal authentication, right? So select the option connect to a internal LDAP directory. Connect to a internal LDAP directory. Say next. It will ask you what will be the organization name, what is your domain and all, right? So give the details. So let me say I give it as CSP and the domain as in. I'll also create a password for this internal LDAP directory, right? I'll create a password for the internal LDAP directory. So let me say I'll give it as admin at 123, confirm the password, right? So configure the password for the internal LDAP directory, say next. And then you have to choose traffic coming from which interface should be considered for authentication, right? Traffic coming from which interface has to be considered for authentication. So here we'll select interface as in interface. So that is our LAN interface. So we are saying if traffic is coming from our LAN interface, right? So from any of our LAN network computer, right? It has to be authenticated, means it has to be taken for authentication. Then enable the checkbox, allow access to LDAP database and finish. So now your internal LDAP directory will be created. Okay, so your internal LDAP directory is created. So now we can go to users and groups. Okay, so now we go to users and groups, and here we can create the user accounts. So in case of ASA, what we did, we have directly started creating user accounts on the ASA firewall. But here we have first created a LDAP directory on the firewall. After creating the LDAP directory on firewall, then we are trying to create the user accounts, right? So first we have created a LDAP directory and then we are creating the user accounts. So let us click on the button add user. So once we click on this button add user, here we can start defining the user account details. So let me say I'll create a user as test1. So give the username and say apply. It will ask you to define a password. Okay, so I'm giving the password as test at 123. Okay, so now as you see, your internal user account is created. First step, you will create, you'll be creating a internal LDAP directory. And the second step, you are going to create a user account. And then you'll have to write a security policy telling the firewall that whenever there is a request coming from LAN network computer, first perform user authentication and then permit the user to access internet. So let us go back to the security policies. In the security policy, I'll say add a new authentication rule. Add a new authentication rule. So in the authentication rule, we say if traffic is coming from network in, that is, if traffic is coming from our LAN network 192.168.10.0 network, trying to access internet, then redirect the user to authentication page. Redirect the user to authentication page. Right. So whenever there is a request coming from our LAN network computer, right, and firewall does not know which user is trying to access internet from that IP. So unknown user from any computer belonging to LAN network. So request is coming from 192.168.10.0 network computer, but firewall does not know which user is trying to browse internet from that system. In that condition, firewall will redirect the user to the authentication page. Right? So their end user has to type their username and password. So once the user ID and password is given, then user will be able to access internet. Right? So there what we do, along with this authentication policy, we will also add the user information into other security policies, because in the other security policy, our source is only LAN network, right? Our source is only LAN network. We did not define anything about user. So what we do is, along with this source as network in, we will also say consider any user who belongs to this csp.in domain. So any user who is authenticated from the csp.in domain should be able to access internet, right? Should be able to access internet from our LAN network computers, right? Say apply. Now let me say I want to access some website. Let's say I'm okay. So I'm trying to access some website on internet, and here, as you see, uh, I'm not able to access the website directly, right? I'm unable to access the website directly. It is first asking me what is the user ID and the password. So it is first saying you have to authenticate. Only after authentication you will be able to access internet, right? So here what I'll do, give the username test1, and the password I have configured as test at 123, and I say I want to access internet for 15 minutes. So automatically after 15 minutes, internet access will be blocked. So now I can access the web page and say I'm trying to download the virus file. Um, because of the anti-malware inspection we have enabled, it will automatically block me from downloading the virus, right? Or maybe say I want to access some shopping website and all, it will be blocking it according to our security policy. And this time you will also be able to see which user has tried to access it. So yesterday it was blocking the website, but it was not mentioning anything about the user, because yesterday when we are checking this authentication, sorry, the URL filter part, the user authentication was not configured. So now user authentication is configured. Firewall says, okay, so and so user, this particular user is trying to access the website and it has been blocked. Okay, so this is how you go with the internal authentication, right? How you create user account on the local firewall itself, and how do you perform authentication. Is it clear? Now let us say we don't want authentication from the local network. We want authentication to be taken from the active directory. You also have that option, right? So if you have a active directory server in your network, you will be able to authenticate users from the active directory. So you'll have to first define the active directory details. You'll have to first define the active directory details on the firewall, right? So what we do is, In the users, we go to directory configuration. We go to directory configuration. In the directory configuration, we will say add a new directory. Right? We will say add a new directory. Okay, so I'm adding a new directory here. So in the wizard, I'll have to define my Active Directory server information, right? So in the wizard, I'll have to define my Active Directory server data, right? So I'm selecting the option connect to a Microsoft Active Directory. Say next. Now it is asking you to give the domain name of your Microsoft Active Directory and all. So on my Active Directory, there is a domain called zoom.com. So I'm defining that. Then it is also asking us what is the IP address of the server. So as of now, I don't have an object created for this. So I'll define a object. So let me say this is a Active Directory IP. 192.168.10.200 is my Active Directory IP address. So I'm giving that information. Right. And then you'll have to define the domain information of your Active Directory. You'll have to define the domain information, right? So that will be defined in this format. So this is the format given by Microsoft. So you'll have to define the details in the exact same form. So domain controller is Zoom, domain controller is com, and then you'll have to define the user information in this format. Common name is the administrator. So here you'll have to define the user account that has a administrator privilege. So it can be any user account, but it should have a administrator privilege. And I say the container name is user. So I'm saying the user account name is administrator and it is available in a container called administrator. So this information has to be given on your firewall, not only in Storm Shield, on any firewall where you try to perform Active Directory integration. This is how you have to give the details. And then give the administrator account password so that whenever firewall is sending a request to your Active Directory for user verification, firewall will send it with the administrator privilege. Right? Now, why firewall has to send it with administrator privilege is because if you are sending it, means if you are trying to send a request to that Active Directory as a normal user, Active Directory will not accept the request and perform the authentication. So Active Directory should always receive the request from an admin account. So that is the reason you are defining the administrator account details here in the firewall. Say finish. Okay, so here you see zoom.com domain is available, right? So what we do is once the domain zoom.com is created, we have to make it as a default authentication directory. So you can define internal directory and Active Directory both together, but authentication can be taken only from either internal or the AD. So you cannot have both internal directory and AD as active, either internal or external, right? So I'll make this as a default. So zoom.com domain, I'm making it as default so that any user authentication, the request will be sent to the Active Directory for verification. After you make the changes, say apply. Now here we don't have to create any user accounts, right? We don't have to create any user accounts on the firewall because all the available user accounts will be taken from your Active Directory itself. So you don't have to manually define any user accounts, but you have to go to this authentication tab, and in the authentication tab you have to see what is the default authentication method. You'll have to see what is the default authentication method. So by default, the authentication method will be LDAP. Right? By default, the authentication method will be LDAP. But when you speak about Active Directory, you're not using LDAP as a authentication method, right? In Active Directory, we use Kerberos as a authentication method. We don't use LDAP. And here, if you see in the available methods, the Kerberos method is not defined. Kerberos method is not defined. So we have to first define the Kerberos method. So click on add a method, Kerberos, and then give the domain name. So zoom.com is a domain name that's on my Active Directory. So I'm giving the domain name. On which server is this available? So it is on 10.200. So define the details, say apply and save. So you're saying that for Kerberos authentication, you'll have to go to this IP address. And then you say consider Kerberos as the default authentication method. Consider Kerberos as a default authentication method. Apply and save the changes. Now, if you go to users, okay. So now here, as you see, when I click on the users tab, I'm able to see all the user accounts that are available on the Active Directory, right? So I don't have to manually create any user IDs here, and you don't even get that option. You'll not even be able to create a user account on the firewall because now your firewall is integrated with AD. So any user account you have to create or you have to modify, you'll be doing it in the Active Directory itself. You'll not be doing it locally on the firewall, right? So now once the Active Directory is integrated, you should also make changes in the security policy, because earlier we said any user who is authenticated from csp.in domain has to be considered for authentication. Now we say instead of a user who is from csp.in, a user from zoom.com domain, which is your Active Directory domain. So this user has to be permitted to reach internet, right? So we say any user authenticated from zoom.com domain has to be permitted for accessing internet. So define all this, apply and activate the security policy, right? So apply the configuration changes, activate the security policy, and then you have to reboot your device once. So I go to system maintenance and reboot the firewall. So once it restarts, we will try with the authentication. Okay, so let's say I want to reach some web page. Firewall will first redirect me to the authentication page. So here I'll have to give the username which is in the Active Directory, right? So I'm giving it, and then give the password. Say OK. So once I give the user ID and password, then Firewall will forward that information to the Active Directory server, get it verified, and once the verification is successful, I'll be permitted to access internet. Right. Now, if I try to access some other website, maybe a blocked category web page, Firewall will say that the website is blocked and is also telling me what is the user ID that I am using here. Right. So it says I have authenticated using this username Zoom, and I'm trying to access this web page, say Flipkart, and because it is a shopping website, it has been blocked. So this is how it shows us the details. So if it is a small network, you only have to create few user accounts, say 5 or 10 user accounts. You can go with internal authentication. But if it is a large network, right, where you have to maintain some hundreds of user accounts, then it is always better to go with external user, right? That is, go with the Active Directory or a external LDAP server. Is it clear how you go with authentications, internal and external authentications on Storm Shield? Okay, so on a UTM device, not only this uh, user authentications or URL filtering and all, right? You'll also be able to control what kind of applications can be accessed by the end user and what kind of applications cannot be accessed by the end users, right? Now, you can also call it as a application control, right? Shrikant, yeah, when you say external authentication, right? What you are trying to do is in the user configuration, you will first define the user directory, or the Active Directory configuration has to be defined in the directories, right? So you are going to select add a new directory. You have to select a Microsoft Active Directory, say next. Define the details like on which IP address is the Active Directory server present, what is your domain name. You'll have to give all the details. So once the details are given, your Active Directory will be created, right? Active Directory will be created, and then because Active Directory does not use LDAP, Active Directory uses Kerberos for the authentication, and the default authentication method by default will be LDAP. Right. So on the UTM, by default, you have the authentication method as LDAP, not the Kerberos method. So what we do is after we define the details of Active Directory and all, then we are adding the Kerberos method. So in Kerberos method, you have to say what is the domain name, right? On which IP address this Active Directory server is available, right? So you have to define the details of your Active Directory and the domain name. So once those details are given, then you are saying the default authentication method should be this Kerberos method. instead of LDAP, you have to say the default authentication method should be the Kerberos method. Right. So once it is done, in the security policy, you are saying that any user who is authenticated from my Active Directory domain should be permitted to access internet. Right. Any user who is authenticated from the Active Directory should be permitted for accessing internet. Is that clear? Okay. And then, as I said, you'll also be able to control which application from your LAN network will be connecting to internet and which application will not connect to internet. The application control, right? Application control is taken care by IPS or intrusion prevention system, right? So IPS in Storm Shield will take care of application control, right? So to access that, below this security policies, you have application protection. So you go to application protection, applications and protections, applications and protection. So here you will see different signatures for different type of applications and all. So you'll see the application signatures, like what applications have to be permitted to access internet, what application have to be blocked to access internet and all. Right. Now let's say for example, I don't want any of my LAN computers or LAN network users to access cloud storage services. Right. I don't want any of my LAN network users to access the cloud storage. So all I need to do is just search for cloud storage. You'll see all different applications, all different cloud storage applications. Right? So select them and say action to be taken is block. So instead of permitting the traffic, you say the action to be taken is block. So what happens whenever LAN user or the LAN network computer tries to connect with that specific cloud storage service, your IPS will automatically deny the connection. It will not let it pass through. Okay. Is it clear? Okay. And here, let's say, for example, I'm trying to search for this application, AnyDesk, which is a remote access application, right? So here, what I'll do, I'll say outgoing traffic, that is traffic from my local network going towards internet from this AnyDesk application has to be blocked. Say apply and save this configuration settings, right? So now if I try to run this AnyDesk application from my LAN computer, right? This AnyDesk application will not connect to the AnyDesk network, right? So as you see, it says disconnected from AnyDesk network. So it is unable to communicate with the AnyDesk servers. So in the same fashion, you can take up different sort of applications and you'll be able to control them. Or you can say, I don't want mobile devices or tablets and all to connect to internet from my office network. I can just go to BYOD settings and then disable all the devices. Or no, I only want to block iPhones from my office network from connecting to the internet. I can only block iPhones or only Android devices, or to be very specific, only HTC device or only LG device or only Samsung device or only Motorola devices. Right. So very specifically, that particular device or that particular branded device will not be able to connect with internet from my office network. Right. So this is how I'll be able to control what applications from my local network will have access to internet and what applications from my local network will not have access to internet. Okay. And this application control will be taken care by IPS or intrusion prevention system. Is it clear? Yes, you also have an option to create custom policies. Yes, as I said, you have an option, you will be able to create custom policies also. Or say anything like, say I want to block TeamViewer, I can do that. Or I can say I want some chat applications to be blocked, right? So I'll be able to block the chat applications, right? So you'll be able to control what all applications will be connecting to the network and what all applications will not be connecting to the network. Okay. So now going to the next step, that is, as of now we have seen how do we configure firewall to permit our LAN network users to access internet or to control our LAN network users from connecting to internet. So the next thing is, let us also see how do we host servers using the Storm Shield device. That is, how will we configure the static NAT using this Storm Shield device, right? So to configure static NAT, uh, here I have my internal server. Let's say this is on the IP 192.168.10.220. Okay, so 192.168.10.220 is the IP address of my internal server, right? So I want to host this website so that internet users will be able to access it. I want to host the website so that internet users can access this particular server. So same as what we did earlier in the ASA firewall, will perform a one-to-one map or a static NAT. So the IP address of my server is 192.168.10.220, and I want to host this server using 206.182, say 201.125, right? I want to host this server using 201.125. So we'll see how exactly this can be done, right? So we go to the NAT configuration, right? We go to NAT configuration, add a new static NAT rule, add a new static NAT rule. So in the static NAT rule, it is asking us for two things. What is a private IP and what is a public IP? So private IP, we don't have a object created for 10.220, right? So we'll have to create a new object. So let us create an object. So let me call it as web private IP address 192.168.10.220. Create. Then we also have to define a public IP. So create a new object for the public IP address also. So let me call it as web public 206.182.201.125. So that's the IP address as per our example. Say create, enable the ARP publication and say finish. Now as usual, you will have these two new rules created. Okay, so two rules are created. Anyone trying to access your public IP, so Anyone trying to access your firewall, sorry, your web server public IP, that request will be translated to the web server's private IP address. Any request initiated from your web server private IP will be translated to the web server's public IP address. Right. The same as what happened in the ASA, two new NAT policies are created. Now in the filtering, let us add a new policy here where we will accept incoming traffic. So here I say traffic coming from any source IP to our web server, which is 201.125, the web server's public IP has to be permitted only for HTTP service. From any source, if traffic is coming to our web server's public IP address, that has to be permitted only for HTTP service, not for all the services, right? It should only be permitted for HTTP. Say okay. Now from the external machine, we will be able to access that server using its public IP address. So let us verify this. So I'll clear all the cache. All the cache is cleared. 206.182.201.125, and as you see, we are able to access that particular web page. Right. So the website can be accessed by internet users. Now, anyway, the website is accessible. Let me also ask you some other question. What if a hacker tries to launch an attack and compromise the server? Will a hacker be successful? So if a hacker is trying to launch an attack, let us see what happens. Okay, so I have the same attack script that we have used in the hacking sessions. 206.182.201.125. So I'll try to use this attack script on the target server. I'll see what would be the result. Okay, so for executing the script, I'll be doing it from Internet Explorer browser. So here if you see, are we able to successfully execute the attack? So as you see, we are unable to launch the attack, right? So we are not able to execute this attack on the remote server. And we know that particular server has a vulnerability, but even though there is a vulnerability on the server, when I'm trying to do this attack is not successful. The simple reason why the attack is not successful is because in case of the Storm Shield UTM, you see, for every security policy, IPS inspection is enabled by default. Right? For every security policy, IPS inspection is enabled by default. Now, what is this IPS or intrusion prevention system? What does it do? So the intrusion prevention system or IPS it has the capability to understand what exactly is the request and see what is the behavior of this request, right? So whenever I am trying to send some request from internet, here the IPS is trying to analyze what is this request and what is the behavior. If I forward this request to the server, what would be the behavior of the request? It's trying to do that. So the IPS module in this Storm Shield UTM is a very advanced module compared to all the other firewalls or UTMs in the market. So this IPS module tries to simulate the incoming request. So whatever request we have sent here, so it tries to simulate this incoming request according to the server application, right? It tries to simulate this incoming request, see the behavior of it according to your server application, and then see what is the behavior, what actually happens if this particular request is sent, what happens if this request is sent to the server. So because it is trying to check the behavior, will the IPS be able to identify if the incoming request is a genuine request or it is an attack? So if IPS is trying to check the behavior, right? Based on the behavior, will it be able to identify if it is a genuine request or it is an attack? So this IPS will be able to see what is the behavior of the incoming request and identify if it is a genuine request or it is an attack based on the request and based on the behavior of it, right? So it tries to simulate environment similar to your web server application, and all this happens within your firewall itself, right? So it is trying to simulate an environment similar to your web server application and see what happens if this request is executed, right? And in that in that particular application simulation, it identifies the behavior of the behavior of the incoming request, saying that this request is trying to access the command prompt, or this request is trying to view the content of the C drive or the D drive and all, and it says this is not a genuine request and it is blocking it. In general, when you go with the other IPS modules other than what is used in the Storm Shield, they'll have something called IPS signatures. They'll have something called IPS signatures. So in IPS signatures, you'll have information like this. If you see a request something like this, dot dot percentage 255C, dot dot percentage 255C and all, right? Then this is a attack. So you'll have a signature which only includes this highlighted part, right? So it says in the incoming request, if you have this content, then it has to be considered as an attack and it has to be blocked. Right. So that's what happens with the signature based IPS. And in case of the Storm Shield, instead of a signature, it is trying to simulate the application's behavior and see the behavior of that request. Now, which method is more effective? Yeah, it is IPS. Both the methods what I've shown is different type of IPS. One is signature based, the other is behavior based. So the behavior based IPS, even though it is more complex, will be more effective in giving you security. Because now let's say if I only go with the signature, right? Now I know dot dot percentage 255C is slash. So if a request is like slash and dot dot percentage 255C, will it match with the signature in the IPS? The signature is dot dot percentage 255C dot dot percentage 255C. But here, instead of giving dot dot percentage 255C twice, I am only giving it once. Right. So if I'm only giving it once, it's not matching with the signature. So if it is not matching with the signature, your IPS will not block it. It will let it pass through. Right. It will just let it pass through. So when it comes to the IPS module, the one which does behavior based analysis is always much better than the signature ones, because signature based IPS inspection can be bypassed. Right? The signature based ones can be bypassed. Right? There are some limitations there, but when you go with the behavior based ones, then you'll not be able to bypass it. And because of this IPS inspection, right, for all the traffic, this particular attack was not successful. And you will also be able to see that in the monitoring part. So if you go to the monitoring part, under monitoring logs, you will be able to see them in the alarms. So alarms is where you will have your IPS related log messages. Now see, it says that it is a high risk attack which was identified and blocked. See that the decision taken by your IPS is block, right? That was a major incident, right? So the request is coming from 206.182.200.123. That's our external mission, right? Our external mission towards your web server on HTTP. Right. So you got a request from the external network mission towards your web server on the HTTP request, and that has been blocked. So this is how your IPS will show you why it is blocking the incoming request. Is it clear how you can view the log? Uh, you, Vijay, when you speak about this particular message, right? So here it is saying that you have received some attack and that was already blocked. So as an administrator, you don't really have to do anything else, because whatever has to be done is already done by the IPS module itself. It has identified the incoming attack and it has also blocked it. So you don't have to take any other additional steps. And not only protecting your server from incoming attacks and all through IPS, you also have one additional option here. So assume I don't want my server to be accessed from certain countries or certain regions, similar to how we were discussing about not permitting our LAN network computers to reach some servers in China. In the same way, I also have a requirement. I don't want users in China or users in some other country to access my server. That can also be done. So what I'll do, I say block all the traffic towards my web server, right? So traffic coming from any source towards my web server has to be blocked for all services. But I'll also be very specific. Instead of saying any source IP, I will say all the requests coming from China has to be blocked. So irrespective of the source IP, if that IP address belongs to China geographic region, automatically that request will be blocked. Right? Automatically that particular request will be blocked. In the same way, I can also write another policy which says traffic coming for my web server from, say, the Tor exit nodes or from the VPN servers or proxy. It's, yeah, from VPNs or proxies and all should be blocked. So if someone is using a proxy or a VPN, they will not have access to my web server, whatever reason it is, right? So for whatever reason they are using a proxy or a VPN, I'm not going to accept it, right? Only if they access it from a genuine IP address, right? We will permit them to access the server. If not, they will not be able to access the server. Okay, so this is how I can write some additional policies to protect my servers. So even if someone wants to hide their IP, they want to use proxy or a VPN or something, they will not be able to access our servers. Is that clear? Guys, are you clear with this configuration? How you can write policies based on the IP reputation and also the geolocation? So these are all like some additional features that you get with a UTM device, right? So we don't see this kind of features on a normal firewall, on a stateful inspection firewall. So these are all like the additional feature set what you get on a UTM, right? Now, same as what we were discussing in the ASA firewall, if you do not have many public IPs, but you wanted to host multiple servers, right? So you also have an option for that. You can configure port redirection NAT. So let me say I'll take up a IP 201 dot, say the same 125 itself, or you can take up 124 or anything. So on this IP address on 201.125, let's say I got a HTTP request. I will forward it to 10.220. On the same IP 201.125, if I got a remote desktop request, I can send it to, say, for example, I can send it to 192.168, 10.30. Right. So if there is a RDP request, I can send it to 10.30. But if I got a HTTP request, I can send it to 10.220. So to the internet user, we are going to uh, give only one public IP address. We'll only be showing one public IP to the internet user. But internally, we'll have different servers. So based on what service is requested by the end user, that request will be forwarded to a different server in the local network, right? So port redirection NAT. So let us see how we can do it on Storm Shield. So when you are trying to configure port redirection NAT, you don't need this static NAT policy. So remove it. Now here I'll say anyone trying to access this public IP address for HTTP service, they should be forwarded to 10.220. So anyone trying to reach 201.125 IP address for HTTP service should be sent to 10.220, which is my web private. So any user trying to reach this public IP for HTTP service will go to 10.220. In the same fashion, I can write one more policy, permit the traffic. Anyone trying to reach 201.125 for port number 3389, 3389 Microsoft terminal service, you already have the service defined here. So if there is a request for 3389, then it will be forwarded to 10.30. So in the advanced properties in the destination, let us create a new host, say RDP system, IP address 192.168.10.30. So anyone trying to reach 201.125 IP address for port number 3389, that is a remote desktop service, that will be sent to 10.30. Say OK and activate. So that's how you are going to use port redirection NAT on a Storm Shield device. So the same public IP address, but based on the service that is requested, you'll go with different servers in the LAN network. Is it clear how we can configure port redirection NAT? Guys, are you clear how we have configured port redirection NAT? Right. So having a UTM device in our network will give us with much better security compared to a stateful inspection firewall. Right. So stateful firewall will not be able to block incoming attacks and all because it will not have IPS, right? And for URL filtering, anti-malware inspection and all, you need to go with third-party integration. And of course, anti-malware inspection is not available on your ASA. URL filtering is available on the ASA, but again for the URL filter, you have to go with a third-party integration. But you don't need all that in the UTM devices, whether it is Storm Shield or you go with Palo Alto or FortiGate or anything. These all features will be built in. Right. Then the next thing that we have to discuss regarding the UTM as well as the stateful inspection firewall is how do we configure virtual private networks? How do we establish or how do we enable secure communication between our network and the branch network, right? Or maybe between our network and the client network, right? So how is that VPN, different type of VPN configurations, different technologies and all that we'll discuss in the next session, right? So, so that will be a long discussion. That will be a bigger topic. So we'll discuss that in the next session. We'll see once we discuss the concept, then if time permits, we'll do the practical. If not practical, we'll be doing it in the next session after that. Is that clear? Yeah. So with this, I end the session for today. So we'll meet in the next session tomorrow. We'll discuss VPNs. Okay. Thank you all.